So we've had some questions about setting the pressure on these Intaglio presses. We've got two identical Charles brand presses here, and we have a larger one as well. This one is currently set up for relief printing, and we've got some little bit of different things happening with this one. Let's start over here. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can set the pressure on your press. I found a way that's kind of easy for students to understand that is pretty translatable. So the first thing that I want to do is just visually inspect it, and also keep an understanding of what I'm printing. Somebody else might be printing a wood block or a lino cut, and so the pressure might be completely different. They might be doing mono printing on different types of plates. So I want to visually inspect this, and I'm looking down here. I'm not sure if you can see that. I'm looking down here to make sure that the roller is actually level with the press bed and it's not cockeyed one way or another. These are old presses, so the press bed does have a bit of a dip in it. So, you know, keep that in mind. So the rollers are making more contact here with the press bed than in the center of the press bed. And so I've tried to raise this up slightly with just building up a bridge underneath this. But so one thing that I like to do is just kind of back these both off a little bit, and I can see that there's light coming through there, and that's good. I'm just going to tighten these up at the same rate. And what I'm looking for is this. I'm looking for that handle is now turning when I move the press bed. So I know that it's making contact, and then I just back it off a little bit, and you can kind of see what's happening there. And then back it off. Now, I'll do the same over here, tighten this until that handle moves, and I can see it's making contact, and then just back it off again. And now I have a pretty good understanding that these two are about the same height. And so I'll just check that again. Now, when we use our blankets for an intaglio work, we have our sizing catcher, which is just felt, and then we have our two wool pusher blankets. So I'm going to line these up, get my sizing catcher in there first, and engage them underneath the roller. Now, if I just left it like this, that's too much pressure, so I'm going to back these off about 1/4 of a turn, maybe even 1/2 of a turn, and I think that would probably be enough pressure to, you know, pull a print and not have it really damage anything. One thing that you can do, if you're not sure, instead of, you know, putting an inked up plate on the press, you can come over there, grab a scrap piece of plate, grab a small scrap piece of paper, and you'll learn that a lot of this is just by feel. You learn by feel if something is too much pressure, too little pressure. So I've got a plate, and I'm just gonna run this through, and I just wanna feel what the pressure's like. That's not bad at all. And actually, it didn't really give me any kickback or anything like that. If you hear a big clang and you really struggle to run this through, then you know you obviously have to back off the pressure. So maybe turn both of these counterclockwise if it's too much pressure. If it needs more pressure, maybe try a 1/4 turn clockwise direction. So I think that this probably needs a little bit more pressure. Yeah, because when I run that through, I can't see the embossment from this in the paper. So I just tightened that one more time. And so I tightened this a 1/4 turn. I'm gonna run this through again. I'm kind of listening and feeling. See, there was a little bit of a jolt there that tells me the pressure was probably pretty good. It still wasn't really difficult to run it through. And I can see a little bit of embossment in there. So I'm gonna do this one more time. And I'm not gonna do a full quarter turn, I'm just gonna do a slightly smaller amount. That's pretty good. I'll check this paper again, and yeah, I can see much more embossment. I could still even get away with a little bit more a turn there, and I think that would be good. If your plate starts to curl, then you know you're using too much pressure, especially if you're doing a delicate aqua tint. You really don't want to have too much pressure going through there, but I think that's good. Also, like, rule of thumb, if you can't turn these when the blankets are engaged, then that's too much pressure. You should be able to turn these with the blankets engaged under the roller. If you can't, you know, you probably have to back off on the pressure a little bit. Okay, so that's our Intaglio press. This one over here operates the same way, so you can change that as needed. This is a pretty large press bed, and it's actually difficult to get it engaged under these rollers, you know, by yourself, because oftentimes you need somebody to kind of lift up and push on that press bed because it's so heavy. Now, right now this is set up for relief printing, and it's set to the height of whatever block I was using on this one. So I've got like a little bit of a rail system so that I don't have to constantly be trying to engage the press bed with this. So this one we've kind of designated for relief printing recently. Let's see. So if I was to print something, you know, we could do this on the smaller presses as well. But if I'm going to print something on this, you can see that this is not the same height as that. So I would want a rail system that's the same height as whatever block I'm using. So last time we were using MDF, and it's the same height as this. That's why these are here. But if I wanted to use something that was this high, the type high of lino, then I would use a different rail system that we have for it. Let's see. I'm going to bring this over to this press, and I'm going to set it up as if I was going to take a print. Now, with block printing, you really don't need the same amount of pressure as you do with Intaglio. With Intaglio, you're taking wet paper, you're running it through under high pressure, and you're pushing the paper into the grooves to remove the ink. Now on block printing, the ink is on the surface of the block, and we really don't have to have that amount of pressure to push the paper into the grooves. And in some cases, you don't want any textural elements or embossment of the paper at all. So the way that we approach this, you might be different under different circumstances. I'm gonna back this off quite a bit. Yep. And I just want to get this so that the block fits underneath the roller. And it's getting there. I have to grease these. And it's getting there. Still got a little ways to go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So I'm just going to kind of let that sit for a second. Now, these are some pieces of wood that we have, you know, for different processes. Sometimes it's just handy to have those around. Now, if I'm doing a small lino cut, I can use a little jig like this. I'll have to make some more of these. But this is set up so that it's actually the same height as my block, right? So it's easy for me. One thing that can happen with relief printing is If this is going through the press and there's a lot of pressure, it might pull on the paper as it goes through, and it might kick up this end. So this is one way that you can kind of relieve the pressure from the block, and it's just a little bit easier for printing. Also, you can set up a registration grid, but what I'm going to do is just lower this again until I'm making contact on both sides. That's good. And visually inspect it. It looks good. That's about the height. And then just give it a small turn more. Okay. Now some people prefer to print with blankets. Some people prefer to print without anything at all. Some people will put a piece of mat board over it to protect the paper, but we're gonna try this. We're not actually gonna ink this up, but if I was going to use a blanket, then I would have to back off on the pressure a little bit, and I would want to decide how many blankets do I use. You know, and there's a few different scenarios where you might want to use blankets, and some where you might not want to use blankets if you need a very fine registration. I'm gonna find a piece of paper, just a little scrap piece of paper, and we will adjust the pressure a couple different ways and just see what our results are in terms of embossment, because maybe we'll get a little bit of embossment on this. So currently this is set up without any. I'm not going to use the jig. Let's just see what happens. If I run this through the press, I might want to keep my hand on there and slowly run it through. Take my hand off, and that would probably be enough pressure. Just with it just barely making contact, I can see a little bit of embossment on the edges of the paper. So that's pretty good. I might, you know, depending on if it was inked up and if it printed fully, you know, then I would make some adjustments. If I get solid blacks, then I don't need to adjust anything. If I still need to get that black without any modeling, I would keep going. Maybe adjust the pressure slight amounts, just like quarter turns, not even quarter turns. You get the idea. Now, I'm going to set the pressure a little bit high this time, and I'm not going to use the jig. You could see what happened with that block that time. It kicked up on the end, and so that was with a little bit more pressure. There's still not a lot going on here though. Now let's just use one blanket. And see what happens to the paper. Once it's engaged, come over here. There we go. You can hear that there was more pressure, and you can see that now I've got some embossment from this print. And it looks like there's more pressure on this side than that, but not much. It looks good actually. So you can see what the difference is. And so, you know, keep that in mind when you're planning for your prints, okay? Usually you won't need all 3 blankets, but 1 blanket is good with block printing. And again, there's lots of different scenarios that you need to take into account for. But for the most part, if you're using, I have much better results printing on one of these press with block prints and lino cuts than I do hand printing. Just something about the pressure, that little bit of extra pressure than you can get when you're hand printing allows for a much richer print. Okay, thanks.